Cush Sovereignty, Black Righteousness. By L. James Bolin. Chapter 4, History Lesson. Big Ma heard Cush and walked toward the door unnoticed, and listened in as Cush finished. She started to cry, "Cush, that was so beautiful." Cush smiled, "Thanks Big Ma." Samuel sat there with a tear falling from his eye and a deep lump in his throat. "What's the title?" "You should have led off with the title first." Cush said, "Dan Daddy, you told me to write and write from the heart, I didn't know about no title." "I guess, God is like your grandfather." After wiping the tear from his eye, Samuel said, "Well, you wrote it. You'll come up with a title later." "I loved it." "And you got the gift, son, you can only get better with time." Cush was excited and started blushing. "Thanks, Dan Daddy." The room was quiet for a few seconds, then Cush said, "Dan Daddy, I saw Gemini this morning. He seems to know what I'm saying." Samuel nods his head, "He does." The approval from his grandfather, or maybe it was the coffee kicking in, but Cush became filled with so many questions. "Why you call him Gemini?" Samuel raised his eyebrows. "Well, son, he was born on my birthday, May 25th, which falls within the zodiac sign of Gemini. Now I'm not too keen on astrology. You can ask your grandmothers about that. The way they explain it to me is that if you're looking down on the Torah, the words you see are the stars and everything beneath the words in white, is the universe. And we are living in a galaxy somewhere in that universe. And that's how Sabaoth see us as well. When you were born, the sun, moon and stars aligned in such a way that it gives you your personality or something like that." Samuel waved his hands in the air. "Again, you're going to have to ask both of your grandmothers, they's the ones that can talk to plants and stuff like that, they can explain it way better than me. Let me finish listening to my recording, and we can finish where I left off yesterday. I'm an avid listener of wise teachers, new and old prophets, and just the truth like that of Frederick, Daniel, and one of my favorites was Prophetess Akelimelech. You see, wisdom allows you to hear the same message over and over and get something different out of it every time you listen to it." Then Samuel turned toward Billy. "Billy, unpause the recording I was listening to earlier." Billy replied, "Sure." A few seconds later. "This month of August, celebrating my Black Indigenous Native American roots and heritage. While my heart goes out to the victims of the catastrophic flooding in Kentucky, it must be remembered and is seldom mentioned that these were all lands that were occupied by and the birthright of Native Americans. We were here. We were first. These lands were taken from my ancestors by European colonizers. The state of Kentucky derives its name from an Iroquois word, Kentuten, which has several meanings. One of these is the river of blood, which describes the present flooding situation. Rivers of water flow through the land. Half of your states in the USA have names that are indigenous in origins. The colonizers named some out of guilt deriving from the knowledge that these lands were taken from their original people, many of whom were driven off of it, and others because natives dominated the region and preserved their heritage in the names. It is the belief of indigenous people the world over that for every act of injustice and inequality, and there will be a reckoning. What is sent out will return in like measure as it was given, as Yeshua the Messiah made clear, with whatever measure you meet, it will be measured back again. Or what Imhotep the Egyptian sage said, what goes around, comes back. With that in mind, I give you a declaration of sovereignty, honoring the Aboriginal people of Earth. As honorary Queen Mother, ordained a prophet and priest of the One Most High and inspired messenger of the only true and living and sovereign Creator, Elohai, I make this declaration on behalf of the global nation of Aboriginal indigenous people of the Earth. We are the first to establish human footprints upon the Earth, and the first to seed it with life. As such, we declare our right to live as independent sovereign nations upon the Earth, which is our inheritance given by the Creator. A right of inheritance institutionalized in the Constitution of the United States as well as its Declaration of Independence, and validated by one of its so-called founding fathers, President Thomas Jefferson. who echoed the universal dictum that these truths are self-evident, that all men are created equal. Endowed by their Creator with certain rights inalienable, that is, these cannot be circumvented by man nor taken away by them. Although these rights have been trampled upon and violated by those who both invaded, colonized and oppressed those of us who are the original people of the earth. Through globalized colonization and economic depression, an attempt was made through a divide and conquer strategy to redefine our status as the first people of the earth, the aboriginal indigenous tribes of the planet. A universal tribe created in the image of Elohim, the sovereign creator whose ancient laws granted us dominion over the planet, as recorded in the Book of Beginnings. The divide and conquer strategy was predicated and successfully implemented through attacks defining who we were by where we were. I asked, does a bird cease to be a bird because you take it out of the jungle and put it in a cage? No, the bird is not defined by its cage but by its phenotype. Archaeology and geography defines where we are. But genetics and genealogy defines who we are. And our spirituality defines what we are. And what we are is free and independent human beings created in the image of a sovereign creator, as acknowledged by Jefferson, one of several framers of the Constitution of the United States of America. This edict recognized as a supreme law of the land. This land being ours by right of preeminent birth and inheritance. As such we declare our right to exist upon this earth as independent sovereign human beings, who are planetary citizens. This is not only our universal right but a sacred one. Samuel shook his head. I thought it was some more left. Anyways, that was Prophetess Akelimelech, one of my favorites. Taking a deep breath, powerful. Now, let's see, where did I stop yesterday? Pausing for a moment. Oh, yeah. This is the part where our story begins in Lake Providence. Come to think of it, I haven't been to many places that haven't been alongside Highway 65. Now, I have been as far south as Waterproof, Louisiana, and as far north as Chicot, Arkansas, where me and your grandmother got married. East? He paused again, thinking. Well, my grandfather lived in Indianola, Mississippi. I've been there quite a few times, especially when I was younger. So that's about it. As far as the west, I haven't gone any farther than Delhi, Louisiana. Oh, Louisiana. Did you know we're the only place that uses parishes instead of counties? Even to this day, you must understand the history. But for now, we're going to just focus on this town called Lake Providence to understand a man named Wanyanyekavu, a young warrior. You see, the alien technology affected many of the cities along the east and west coast, but Louisiana and Mississippi were some of the few places hardly touched by this new world of technology created by these Abenians. In Louisiana, places like New Orleans, Shreveport and Baton Rouge turned into metros or ville de bulle, which means in our native tongue bubble cities. In Mississippi, we only have Jackson and Gulfport. I'll use the word Wakatilians from now on because some of these people are not of our tribe, but are still considered Wakatilians. Cush shook his head. Okay. Samuel continued, the Wakatilians mostly lived in these types of rural areas. I guess it started when the Europeans settled Lake Providence and surrounding areas in the late 1830s. Once the federal government started enforcing the indigenous people, they called natives, further west of the Mississippi River and took their land. They drained the cypress swamps along the Mississippi River and used slaves to clear the land for cultivation. By the mid-1800s, Louisiana was so ruthless and heartless back then that they jailed our people for no reason at all. Even our women were housed in the same cells as male prisoners, and some became pregnant willingly and many unwillingly. Of course, they passed laws declaring that all children born in the prison of our people serving life sentences would be the state's property. The women would raise the kids until the age of 10, then auctioned off, and the proceeds were used to fund schools for white children. Do you know who purchased these kids? Mostly prison officials, of course. Cush looked up and saw a tear fall from Samuel's eyes. Samuel pauses as he wiped the tear from his eyes, then takes a long sigh as he continues, anyways, by the start of the American Civil War, the region mainly consisted of large cotton plantations along the river, which were worked by thousands of slave laborers. Lake Providence quickly developed after the Union Army came and built itself as a supply depot. The soldiers started digging a canal between the Mississippi River and Lake Providence. This was the same time slaves crowded into the camp at Lake Providence, thinking they were about to get their freedom. The population quickly went from a few 100 to several 1,000. A military supply camp quickly turned into a city of slave refugees. They historically developed Lake Providence into cotton plantations before and after the Civil War. By the late 1800s, trade became famous because of the Mississippi River. Longboatmen eventually were replaced by the steamboats transported animal pelts, indigo and of course, cotton, on the Mississippi River, making Lake Providence a significant trading town. The carpetbaggers or scalawags, as they were called, were greedy and heartless men who took advantage of the situation because there was a long line of abandoned plantations leased by the military. They wanted free labor, slaves. These scalawags were nothing more than ruthless overseers. They said the most negligent planter had shown more respect for their slave than these men. I'm going to say this and continue because I don't enjoy thinking about this and you can read about that on your own. But slaves that were too old, sick or too young were weeded out and sent to federal contraband villages in camps along the river. These villages included Wilmon, Transylvania, Omega, Ashley, and lastly here in Tallulah. And Highway 65 was born. Pausing for a minute, he continued. Oh, I will also say that they charged the slaves up to 5 times the actual value of things. Slaves were always told that the master owed them nothing by the end of the year, but they actually owed him money, and they would often boast about their deception. So, we were always in debt, and many felt they could never get out from under them. So, our people were mentally, physically, and financially slaves, and they held us back for centuries. Anywho, one of these plantations was Erie Plantation. This is where one of our descendant was a slave, Willis Reynolds, Sr. We know very little of his birth or death. But according to the 1880 census of Erie Plantation, Willis and Kate were born in 1854. His parents were from Virginia, and her parents were from Florida. It was a common practice to take our people's babies at or near birth so their parents weren't able to teach them who they were. But that's another story for later. Willis and Kate, at that time, only had 4 kids: Sims, William, Samuel, and Rebecca. However, they had 5 more who came along later: Grant, Leona, Albert, Belle, and Sue. They had names from their former slave owners. In their case, it was Reynolds. As a matter of fact, everyone had surnames or government names back then, and clans were not adopted again until the Abenians came on the scene. Education was poor back then, most never saw the 6th grade. His son, Sam or Samuel Reynolds, was born in 1875 as a sharecropper but died a free man right here in Tallulah. In 1985, they named me after him. Sam Reynolds married Cherry Relic on March 8, 1920, in Chickett, Arkansas. She was born in 1902 and died in 1998. Even her last name was spelled more than one way, like Reddick and Relics, and they had 5 boys: Sam Jr., Willis, Clifton, James, and John. They had 5 girls: Elizabeth, Essie Lee, John's twin sister, Cora Lee, Lee Gussie, and the baby girl, our descendant, Mary Reynolds. Cherry's mother was Mariah Johnson, and her parents were Tom and Violet Johnson, both born in Lake Providence. Tom and Violet had 2 other children named Susan and Henry. Little is known of Cherry's father other than he died in Mississippi. There are speculations that his name might have been Ben, Benny, or Mac, and he lived in Bolivar County, Mississippi. But her mother, Mariah, remarried Silas Diggs, Sr., and they had Willie, Isaiah, Hezekiah, Elizabeth, Lizzie, Silas Jr., and Wesley. These are your ancestors from your mother's side of the family. On your father's side, it's a little confusing, but there is more information because they were mostly Anakataas, but this is what I know. Samuel took a deep breath. Okay, John Bolin was born in 1787 and married Miranda Chaddock. Their children were Arthur, James, Ezekiel, Cecilia, Rebecca, Sarah, Susanna, and William. James Bolin, our descendant, married Frances Pitts and their children were Thos, but Thos was named Thos Van and his nickname was T.V., so it was Thos Van, Mary Ann, Sarah, William Harrison, John, Francis, and Laura. Samuel paused for a moment. I'm not even halfway through, but you can read it yourself. Passing him a book. Cush smiled. Nah, Dan Daddy, I like it when you read it to me. Samuel gave him a look. Well, okay. Most of the people I mentioned lived in Natchez, Roxy, and Amite, Mississippi, except when William came to Tallulah with his son. It might have been racially motivated because of Thos's son William, who was named after his brother. William Harrison, who died. Scratching his head, I told you it was confusing. You know what, it might have been William's son Albert, who married a Wakatilians and created a rift in the family. Hell, I don't know, it might have been the both of them because William and Albert, both, lived right here in Tallulah. I'm just guessing about that part, but I know no one came to visit him but his brother James, who himself moved to Jackson, Mississippi, afterward. Anyways, Thos Van's son, William married Lizzie. She died right up the street in Thomastown in 1949, but their children were Leona, John, James, Sam, our descendant, Albert, and Leon Bolin. That's as far as I'm going, but I will say when Thos Bolin was born in 1832 and his son William was born in Natchez, Mississippi, around 1868 and eventually moved to Roxy, Mississippi, around the time of the Devil's Punch Bowl. Cush looked at Samuel. Devil's Punch Bowl. What's a Devil's Punch Bowl? Well, the Irish were often used as overseers, especially in the South, and many said after the horrific event was coined the Devil's Punch Bowl. Cush said, Ireland? Samuel said, yes, but that's another history lesson. Let's just say he's a descendant of Chi on her father's side of the family for now. Anyway, let's see, okay. Albert Bolin. Oh shit. I'm trying to follow this thing, hold all those questions for now. Samuel paused as he tried to remember where he left off. Now, I got it. Most of them Bolins were brought here during the Great Irish Invasion of 1840. I'm just going to start with William. You can ask Kakahoya about TV, and I'll call William, Will, from now on. Cush shook his head. Okay, I'll ask Mamaline and Big Ma about talking to plants and about this too, when I get a chance, as Samuel continued. Great. Now, Will was a just man and was reminded of the mistreatment of his people and the many problems in Ireland and, when they became overseers, some of them couldn't stomach the mistreatment of Wakatilians. It reminded them of what their people had escaped from, so they left. Moving from Natchez, Mississippi, they quickly made their way to Roxy, Mississippi. There is so much missing on your father's side of the family because the fire in 1920 destroyed the census reports, but you can ask your father, he knows more than I do. I did some research and found out this information I'm about to tell you. I know that not long after slavery, two of the Bolin brothers, Albert and James, whom they called Jim, got into the lumber business, a very lucrative business in Louisiana during this time. I know that the lumber business was growing so fast that Will and his family moved here to Tallulah. James and his brother, Albert, heard of a new lumber mill built just 82 miles north of them in Tallulah, so they convinced their father and packed their bags. Not long after arriving there, Albert fell madly in love with a young lady named Catherine Wilson from Camac, Louisiana. James was furious, not because he hated Wakatilians but because he feared for his brother's life, for this was a time when Anakataas couldn't marry Wakatilians. You can abuse them but not fall in love with them. Albert's skin was white, so he was white. If they had known he was Irish, they wouldn't have a problem with it. They shot first, then asked questions later. Back then. He paused. It's about DNA and not skin color now, so happens, that same DNA contains that same color. As I was saying, out of frustration, old James moved to Jackson, Mississippi, and Albert stayed here and bought up 99 acres of land, moving into a farm in the middle of Tallulah away from the public's eye, and married Catherine. They had 12 children. Samuel held up his fingers as he counted. 6 boys, David, Albert Jr., Doyle, Willie, Johnny, and Jimmy, and 6 girls, Thelma, Bertha, Geraldine, Catherine, Mary Sue, and Albertine Bolin. Remember, they didn't have tribes or clans back then, but since they weren't slaves, they brought their last names with them from Ireland. Samuel took a long deep sigh as he leaned back. Woo! As years passed, Albert's son, Willie, and Sam Reynolds' daughter, Mary, got married, and had 3 children, Willie Jr., there goes another one. Damn, was there any other names than Will, William, and Willie back then? Shouted Samuel. On top of that, Bill is short for William. As he started laughing, he continued. Anyways, they also had a daughter named Annette and a son named Larry. Mary later married and had 3 more daughters with Melvin Harrison. Melinda, Darlene, and Tammy. Larry married Deke, and they had Justin. Justin had a Johnny during the race war of 2025. Cush interrupted, ooh, I know this part. A Johnny had Alenia, Alenia had Namito, Namito had Kisama, Kisama had Bandile, Bandile had Bokamoso. Samuel smiled as Cush continued. Chayton had Magi, Magi had Attain, Attain had Elun. Samuel stopped him. No, not Elun, but Elon, and Elon had Atu, Atu had Ahanu, Ahanu had Mfo, Mfo had Labanzi. Together Samuel and Cush finished the family tree, but Cush stopped at Ease, but Samuel helped him. Ease had Tablita and Tablita had Liberte, whose name was changed by Sabaoth to Wanyanyekavu. It impressed Samuel how Cush could recite the family tree at his age, very good, just to be 10 years old. Samuel told Cush. But those times have been long gone, and it has been over 1,000 years, and Lake Providence hasn't changed that much. Many of the old abandoned plantations are used as libraries and museums now. Plenty of wild animals roam the land, and we still ride on horseback to get around, and most people here are community farmers. Samuel thought about what he was saying and felt happy. Yeah, even the creeks, ponds, and lakes haven't been affected much by the Abenians and this new age of technology. We work together to keep the air and the water clean. He took an even longer pause and sat there just thinking, and then said, sorry, Cush, my mind is all over the place. But start with our ancestor, Tablita, whom we take our tribal name from. Him and his wife Aba along with his children, 5 boys, and 6 girls, lived just a quarter of a mile east of that small river we call the Bar, in Lake Providence. Tablita was a spiritual man, and Aba, his wife, was a seer. They both taught their children the ways of Sabaoth. Liberte was the youngest, 5 foot, 8.5 inches tall, and weighed roughly 175 pounds. He had a deep love for Sabaoth and loved history. He was thin but a very muscular young man, born in 3019. Liberte was also a poet and loved writing about the different things he saw in his life, but mainly about the injustice of his people and his love for Sabaoth. One night when he was 16 years old, he took a long walk alongside Lake Providence because he couldn't sleep. Sitting down at the lake, he looked across it, looking at the fish jumping, and said, "Fishin'," so he took out a small flashlight and began to write. We as humans are all brothers, doesn't matter the color or creed. It's love that we need. Do I have to repeat it? We all are brothers. There are many that hate, there are many who dispute who's the greatest. To me, it's not about color of skin, type of kin. Your decision on religion, it is surely not about politics. It's all about the Almighty. And searching for Him is like fishing. Some get up early, about 5 in the morning, some go around noon, and some go late in the day, just to get away. It doesn't matter when you go. It's where you go and how you fish. Everyone has their style, their method of fishing, but all have to be patient, just like when you search for the Almighty. Many come early, some come late. But once you get there, you receive your reward from the Lord. Those that don't fish don't know what they are missing. When you are sad, frustrated, angry, mad, or bored, try fishing for the will, the power, the salvation of the Lord. As Liberté was writing, a messenger appeared before him. Unaware that it was the ancient Ferigi, a spiritual entity that we Wakatilians believe guides our path, the messenger first came to him as an elderly man. Why is it you can't sleep, young Liberté? Has the spirit of Sabaoth prepared you for your journey? Liberté puzzled, what journey do you speak of? I just couldn't sleep and took a walk along the lake until I came across. Hey, how is it you know my name? Liberté asked as he put up his notebook and gathered his thoughts as he stood up. The messenger continued, the spirit of King Solomon is upon you. Sabaoth have blessed you with Solomon's wisdom, heart and soul. Like Elijah, Elisha, and countless others, Sabaoth often used one man to get his people to see. You and your descendants, after you, will use words of wisdom, peace, and the sword to destroy Sabaoth's enemies. Your writings have reached the ears of Sabaoth, and he rejoices in your words. For this reason, you are no longer called Liberté but Wanyanyekavu. The old man transformed into a wolf. Liberté shook his head and rubbed his eye as the man continued to speak. In 3 days, you will see me again in this form, and I will be your guide on a journey. For the next 3 days you shall perform the holy jeûne and bid your family farewell, for they will not see you for 150 seasons. Know this, before you leave the state of Louisiana, you will endure many trials and tribulations to enhance your spiritual man as well as your physical body that will prepare you for your journey. Be not afraid, for Sabaoth will be with you along the way, no physical harm shall befall you. Quickly interrupting, Liberté smiled and said, how can a man live to be 150 seasons, sir? The ancient Ferigi said, you know that with Sabaoth, all things are possible, but it will not be you, but your blood and your spirit that shall return to Sabaoth's people, and his name shall be called Cush. With your blood, in seeing, you shall see more, and, for hearing, you shall hear more. And with your spirit, you shall control the flesh, see with the eyes of Sabaoth, and teach others to do the same. The old man smiled as he transformed again, behold, your wife. As he continued, an image of a beautiful woman appears in a cloud of smoke. Your spirits are one, and the love you share will be forever. It will be remembered as an example of Sabaoth's happiness between man and woman. Liberté said curiously, wife. Liberté. 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 He heard a voice cry out, who is that? Liberté said as he turned around. It was his loving mother, Aba. It is past noon, you lay in bed as if you have nothing to do. Go fetch the water so I may water my garden. His father, Tablita, looked at Liberté and shook his head in anger. Liberté stood up in his bed and grabbed his notepad. He scrambled through the pages and saw the poem, Fishin'. He rushed to get dressed and dashed out the door to get water for his mother's garden. He was also confused about what had happened. Was it a dream or vision from Sabaoth? Then he reached down to get the water out of the river, and as he reached into the water, an image of the wolf appeared in the water. Hearing, in 3 days, make haste, he heard the voice of the messenger once again. Jeûne was a ritual performed by the Wakatilians. One would go without food or fast as you consecrate yourself to the Lord. By doing so, you're building up the spiritual man and lowering or resisting the physical man or your flesh. Flesh refers to your material or fleshy weaknesses and desires. The holy jeûne was more intense than a regular jeûne or fast. You spent the entire time in a room filled with smoke from herds that enabled you to see more and hear more. As Liberté looked back to see if there was indeed a wolf behind him, he said to himself, I must return and prepare myself for the journey. He grabbed the bucket filled with water and ran home, spilling water everywhere along the path. He reached home and ran into the house to his mother and father. Liberté said quickly and fiercely, I have seen the many faces of the ancient Ferigi. I was Instructed to perform the holy jeûne for the next 3 days, and I shall not see your face again after that. Let us perform the holy jeûne together, for I shall need your guidance, and all that you have taught me must be enforced. Upon explaining what happened to him, Tableda's face and spirit changed and answered, "So it is." Liberté read from the Book of Kings, from the ancient Torah, a book the Wakatilians believed contained the words of Sabaoth. After 2 days of training and fasting with his father, he spends 1 day in a holy jeûne with his mother and siblings. He knew they would not see one another again, with tears in their eyes but joy as well in their heart, for they knew Sabaoth called him to do great work in his life. On the 3rd day, around dusk, the wolf appeared to Liberté. With sadness in his eyes, he bid his family farewell and left on his journey. Wanyanyekavu. Liberté turned around, his father was waving with tears in his eyes. Wanyanyekavu was in shock, for he had told no one of his new name. As he slowly turned back around, his heart was filled with sadness, for he knew he would never see his family again. "Make me proud, my son," said Tableda. With tears in his eyes, he replied, "It will be so,